Okay, so if you're having problems figuring out an approach to making a shadow, let me show you one of the approaches that you can take. So if I go over here to my smoothie folder and I look inside of it, I have my masked smoothie. So one of the things that I can do is I can duplicate this layer. So I'm going to drag it down to the new layer icon. And I'm just going to relabel the top copy, excuse me, smoothie. And then the bottom copy, I'm going to relabel as smoothie shadow. Okay, and I'll spell it correctly. All right, and then I want to get rid of the layer mask on here, but I want to actually keep it so that the mask pixels are not there anymore. So one of the things I can do is I can select the mask and I can drag the mask to the trash. And what's going to ask me is, hey, do you want to apply this before you delete it? And you can say apply. And then basically it'll rasterize that layer so that the masked pixels are essentially just removed. It was a destructive change. All right, but I do have the original mask copy up here that has non-destructive masking changes. So if I turn the eyeball off on this top one, you can see that the bottom one is still there. So for right now, I'll turn this top one off. And then where it says smoothie shadow, I'm going to take this and I'm going to select the pixels. And so now the pixels are selected, but I want to give it a shadow so that the edges are kind of soft. And so I'll go up here to select. I can't just, by the way, I can't just go here to feather because this feather is only good for before you make a selection with a tool. So I'm going to go over here to select and I'm going to choose modify feather, and that can retroactively add a feather to something. So I'll go here and I'll change that. Let's do about 5. We can even do a little bit more, maybe about 8 pixels on this example. And now what I want to do is I don't want to do a non-destructive change. I actually want to do a destructive change where I turn this to something that's dark. And one quick trick that you can, if you ever cared about it, you could always choose to hide your selection edges so you can see what's happening, is you can go up here to view, go to show, and deselect selection edges. Now, if you ever do that, just be aware that it's really easy to forget that you still have an active selection, and you can try to do stuff that won't work and outside of your selection, and that can be frustrating. So, but if you want to be able to see without those edges present, those marching ants present, you can do that. So anyway, so if you can come in here, and now with I have an active selection with the edges just hidden. And I can go over here to image and I can go to adjustments and I can go to hue saturation. And I'm going to make a destructive change. I'll say colorize. I'm going to turn the lightness down really, really low. I'll turn the saturation down, maybe get this in sort of an oranger range. And it doesn't actually matter that much if I turn the saturation all the way down, but I'm going to turn the lightness down. So I get sort of a warm, dark color. And I could turn it like literally all the way down to complete black if I wanted. Anyway, so now I've got this this shadow, and I can turn on the top layer, and you don't really see it very much, but as long as I've got the shadow selected, I can go ahead and manipulate this. So I'm going to rotate it. First of all, I'll go over here and I'm going to choose to transform, rotate. Okay, and then I can rotate this so that it would basically be kind of like the angle of the light source. So if you consider that the light source maybe is coming from somewhere in the front over here, casting this way, then the shadow would probably be cast somewhere in this direction, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll commit to that rotation, and then I'm going to go ahead over here and I'm going to choose to scale. And well, first of all, if it's easier for you to see this sort of not as something that's so black, you can go ahead and turn the opacity down, and it starts to look sort of more shadow-like, all right? And then you can go over here and choose edit, and then we can choose scale. We can also choose distort. Let's do distort because that might be a better tool for our needs, because then you can kind of also distort the perspective a little bit. You can move this around. You have a little bit more in terms of options. I'm going to nudge with my nudge tools, and that might be the wrong direction. I think maybe I don't want to distort it quite so much. And then let's nudge it down a little bit. And then you can sort of change the way that this looks, because it looks a little bit like, this edge was a little bit harsh. I want it to be a little more rounded. If you want the distortion to change so that it kind of pushes that all the way off. And then, the idea is that if you have just a little bit of the shadow under this back edge, right, just under the edge right here, then it starts to look a little bit more realistic, because usually shadows don't start like completely behind something. So you can kind of play around with where this shadow would be. And if you wanted to even experiment with it being, let's say, kind of a little bit under the glass, that's not going to work. I think that if we move it back over here, it'll be in better shape. So again, I'm using my nudge tool to kind of nudge the shadow around a little bit. With my arrow keys, by the way. All right, and so like I might like that shape. You can kind of play with it, and maybe you feel like it needs to be a little bit more collapsed. So if we want to go back there and distort that again, we can maybe collapse it just a little bit more. All right, so that it feels like a little more distorted and shadow-like. However you want to mess with this, you can adjust, the opacity of that shadow. If you wanted the edges to be even softer, you can make it even softer. If you wanted to, well, let's close that. If you wanted to go in and make some adjustments to the edges, either with the eraser tool or even better yet with the refine tool. So however you want to do this, and then you would basically do the pineapple the same way. And then if you wanted to make sure that these two things always got moved around together, you could select both the smoothie and its shadow, right click it, and you could link the layers. And so that way, if you, move the smoothie around, then the shadow also gets moved around, okay? So I'll just undo that. All right, so that's one of the ways that you can start to think about making shadows.